We are counting down the 9 everyday things people did in the 1980s that could get you arrested today. From long-forgotten childhood freedoms and road trip rituals to risky behaviors that were once routine, each entry reveals just how dramatically culture, law, and technology have changed our lives. Which of these once normal activities tops the list as today's biggest legal shock? Let's begin, starting with number 9. In the 1980s, family road trips often meant piling everyone into a station wagon or a pickup truck with no seatbelts required. Kids sprawled out in the rear-facing way-back seat, sometimes pressed against the glass, or bounced along in the open bed of a pickup, hair whipping in the wind. For many, this was the backdrop of summer, windows down, music up, and no restraints in sight. That scene felt like freedom and family togetherness. There was no federal seatbelt law before 1984, and most states left it up to drivers whether to buckle up. Child restraint systems were rare, and riding in a cargo area was seen as a harmless rite of passage, especially in rural and suburban communities. That changed after tragedies like the Carrollton, Kentucky crash in 1982, when children riding unrestrained in a pickup bed were thrown from the vehicle, leading to hospitalizations and a statewide push for child safety laws. Kentucky passed its first child restraint bill in 1983, and soon after, federal mandates followed. Today, every state bans passengers from riding in cargo beds, and all require seatbelts. What was once a symbol of childhood independence and family togetherness now brings fines or even child endangerment charges, reflecting a new era in how we define safety on the road. On a typical Saturday in the 1980s, children set out on bikes or on foot, sometimes vanishing from breakfast until dusk. Neighborhoods, parks, and even construction sites became playgrounds, with the only rule being to return home when the streetlights flickered on. Parents trusted that kids would look out for each other, and the idea of constant adult supervision was rare. In most towns, no one thought to call the authorities if a child was seen alone, even miles from home. That sense of independence was woven into daily life, shaped by a culture that valued self-reliance and adventure. But a series of high-profile disappearances, including Jacob Wetterling in 1989, changed the national mood. The Jacob Wetterling Act of 1994 required states to create sex offender registries and pushed for stricter missing child protocols. As mandatory reporting laws expanded, leaving a child unsupervised could trigger a police welfare check or a Child Protective Services investigation. Today, many states set minimum ages for children to be left alone, and reports of unsupervised minors can lead to accusations of neglect. What once passed as ordinary childhood freedom now risks legal scrutiny, reflecting a dramatic shift in both parenting and the law. In the 1980s, lighting up a cigarette in a shopping mall food court or an airplane row was as common as grabbing a soda. Smokers drifted through department stores, restaurants, and even schools without a second thought. Ashtrays lined the arms of airplane seats, and flight attendants handed out complimentary packs on longer flights. At the same time, open beer cans and wine coolers dotted beaches, city parks, and stadium parking lots as families and friends gathered in public spaces. Few cities had open container laws, and drinking at a concert or tailgate rarely drew police attention. These habits reflected a time when public health concerns took a back seat to personal freedom, and the risks of secondhand smoke or public intoxication were not yet part of daily conversation. That began to change as research linked smoking to cancer and drunk driving to fatal crashes. By 1988, airlines began banning smoking on domestic flights. By 1990, all U.S. carriers had joined in. Cities and states rolled out smoke-free ordinances and open container bans, enforced by fines or even arrest. Today, lighting up in a mall or cracking a beer in a public park can quickly mean a ticket, and drinking or smoking near children brings even harsher penalties. The transformation of public spaces into regulated, health-conscious environments is now woven into daily life, making yesterday's casual habits a legal risk. Thumbs out on the highway, a battered backpack at your feet. Hitchhiking was a fixture of the 1980s youth and travel culture. College students caught rides to music festivals, seasonal workers moved between towns, and teens tested their luck on summer adventures. The practice was not just tolerated, it was woven into the fabric of cross-country movement, especially for those without cars or bus fare. But as the decade wore on, a wave of anxiety about crime and missing persons changed the conversation. Policymakers and police began to see hitchhiking less as a rite of passage and more as a public safety concern. In Arizona, 1988 brought a turning point. Operation Roadhouse was a coordinated effort by the Department of Public Safety that flooded highways between Phoenix and Tucson with patrols. More than 300 citations were handed out in a matter of weeks, targeting both hitchhikers and the drivers who stopped for them. Officers cited Arizona Revised Statutes Section 28796, which forbade standing on a roadway to solicit rides. For most of its history, the law had been a technicality, and it was rarely enforced. Operation Roadhouse changed that overnight, making headlines statewide and drawing criticism from civil liberties groups who argued it unfairly targeted the poor and young travelers. Other states took note. By the early 1990s, laws against roadside solicitation were enforced in much of the country. Today, standing with your thumb out on a highway shoulder can bring an immediate ticket or even arrest for repeat offenses. Drivers, too, risk fines for unsafe stopping or for picking up strangers in restricted areas. What was once a symbol of freedom and resourcefulness is now criminalized in the name of traffic safety and liability. Hitchhiking's fall from grace mirrors the broader transformation of public spaces, where movement and gathering are no longer governed by informal trust, but by the letter of the law. 4th of July in the suburbs once meant bottle rockets in the street and the sharp pop of firecrackers echoing through the neighborhood. Kids roamed backyards with BB guns slung over their shoulders, aiming at cans, or staging elaborate games of cops and robbers. In Naperville, Illinois, the summer of 1986 brought a turning point. A 10-year-old boy, Michael Fenzau, lost vision in one eye after a bottle rocket struck him during a neighborhood celebration. The injury drew headlines and led Naperville's city council to ban the sale and use of all consumer fireworks within city limits, one of the first such ordinances in the region. Other towns soon followed, and by the early 1990s, only a patchwork of states still allowed backyard fireworks without restriction. The federal government had already banned M80s and cherry bombs for consumers back in 1966, but these powerful explosives lingered in garages and glove boxes and were traded among kids who saw them as trophies. The Consumer Product Safety Commission tightened standards again in the 1970s, limiting the explosive content in legal fireworks and mandating warning labels. Homemade devices remained a fixture of suburban mischief and a source of emergency room visits, until stricter enforcement made possession a potential felony. BB guns and pellet rifles, once indistinguishable from real firearms, became the focus of new rules after a string of police shootings involving toy weapons. In 1988, federal law required all imitation guns sold in the United States to have bright orange tips. Today, carrying a BB gun in public can lead to brandishing charges, and homemade fireworks are prosecuted as illegal explosives. What began as innocent summer fun now falls under the weight of product safety laws, city ordinances, and criminal codes, an evolution shaped by real injuries and the drive to keep neighborhoods safe. A rotary phone in the kitchen, a list of numbers scribbled by hand, and a bored afternoon were the ingredients for a classic 1980s prank call. Kids dialed strangers, pizza shops, even emergency services. They disguised their voices and hung up in fits of laughter. The anonymity felt absolute. Without caller ID or digital records, tracing a call meant a laborious process involving the phone company and usually a serious crime. Most pranks ended with a scolding from a parent or, at worst, a warning from the local police. But as the decade wore on, the consequences grew. Bomb threats and fake 911 calls, once dismissed as childish mischief, began to overwhelm emergency responders. In 1989, Lane Tech High School in Chicago faced a spree of bomb threats that forced repeated evacuations. Administrators turned to a new technology, caller ID. When another threat came in, police traced the number to a 15-year-old student. He became the first juvenile in the country convicted of felony emergency services misuse based on caller ID evidence. The Chicago Tribune covered the case as a warning. The days of true prank call anonymity were over. Laws caught up quickly. By the early 1990s, false bomb threats, hoax 911 calls, and swatting could bring felony charges, with penalties including jail time and heavy fines. Digital forensics and traceable phone records mean that even a single prank can trigger a criminal investigation. What once passed as a harmless joke is now a serious crime, prosecuted under emergency interference and terror threat statutes. The rotary phone prank is gone, replaced by a world where every call leaves a footprint. After a night out in the 1980s, it was not unusual to see someone get behind the wheel after drinking, with little fear of serious consequences. Police often let drivers off with a warning or a friendly reminder to be careful. Breathalyzer tests were rare, and legal blood alcohol limits, when they existed, varied from state to state. The social stigma around drunk driving was minimal, and the risks were often downplayed in conversation and the media. In 1980, Candace Lightner founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving after her daughter Carrie was killed by a repeat drunk driver. Lightner's campaign brought national attention to the human cost of lax enforcement and sparked sustained advocacy. Mothers Against Drunk Driving used relentless letter writing, public rallies, and congressional testimony to put pressure on lawmakers, making drunk driving a political issue rather than just a personal failing. By 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, tying federal highway funds to a drinking age of 21. States rushed to comply, and soon uniform blood alcohol content limits, first 0.10 then 0.08, became standard across the country. Enforcement changed just as quickly. Routine checkpoints, mandatory arrests, and automatic license suspensions replaced warnings and lectures. Zero-tolerance laws for drivers under 21 made even a trace of alcohol grounds for arrest. A driving under the influence conviction now means a criminal record, heavy fines, possible jail time, and years of social and financial fallout. Mothers Against Drunk Driving archives still hold letters from families who lost loved ones, a reminder of why these laws became so strict. What once passed as a minor infraction is now one of the most aggressively prosecuted offenses in American law. The era of casual, socially accepted drunk driving ended with a wave of advocacy and federal action, leaving no room for the leniency that once defined the 1980s road. Pocket knives clipped to belt loops, nunchucks tucked into backpacks, and firecrackers traded on the playground. These were ordinary sights in American schools during the 1980s. Teachers handled most problems themselves, whether it was a scuffle in the hallway or a student caught with a lighter. Detention, a call home, or a stern lecture usually closed the matter. School discipline was an internal affair, and police involvement was rare, even for fights or minor weapons. That approach began to unravel as public concern about youth violence grew in the late 1980s and early 1990s. High-profile incidents and a national conversation about safety led lawmakers to demand stricter controls. In 1994, Congress passed the Gun-Free Schools Act, requiring every state to expel any student who brought a firearm to school for at least 1 year. States risked losing federal education funding if they failed to comply. The law's definition of a weapon soon expanded, and many districts adopted zero-tolerance policies covering not just guns, but also pocket knives, martial arts gear, and even firecrackers. By the mid-1990s, a pocket knife or slingshot in a backpack could mean a police referral or a juvenile court appearance. In some cases, students were suspended or arrested for bringing items as small as nail clippers, or for making threats, even if meant as jokes. The shift was dramatic. What once counted as mischief or poor judgment became grounds for expulsion or a criminal record. School resource officers, a rarity in the 1980s, became a fixture on campuses across the country, and routine discipline moved into the realm of law enforcement. Today, even minor incidents can trigger mandatory suspensions, police reports, or charges that follow a student for years. The everyday objects and roughhousing that defined a generation's school days have become symbols of a broader transformation, one where the boundary between childhood misbehavior and criminal conduct is drawn by policy, not just by common sense. Storm drains, train yards, and abandoned factories once drew kids like magnets. In the 1980s, these places became the backdrop for endless summer adventures, with BMX riders filming stunts in concrete ditches, groups of friends chasing urban legends through echoing tunnels, and teenagers scaling rooftops just for the view. Movies like The Goonies, Stand By Me, and E.T. captured that spirit, turning real-life exploration into a rite of passage. Most cities left these places unfenced and unwatched, trusting that curiosity would run its course. A handful of warning signs was usually the only barrier between a group of kids and a forgotten rail spur or stormwater tunnel. Freedom felt normal then. But as the decade ended, the risks started to catch up with that freedom. A rise in accidental injuries and a growing number of lawsuits forced property owners to reconsider. By the early 1990s, insurance companies and city attorneys warned that a single trespassing injury could bring massive liability. The legal concept called attractive nuisance, places so tempting to children that property owners could be held responsible for accidents, became a powerful incentive to lock everything down. In Denver, stories circulated about a major liability case involving Union Pacific and the city's legendary storm drain BMX spot. While no single lawsuit stands out in public records, the pressure was real. Railroads and municipalities across the country responded by fencing off ditches, storm drains, and abandoned structures, sometimes overnight. Denver passed new ordinances making entry into these sites a misdemeanor, and police began regular patrols to keep explorers out. Technology quickly made trespassing even riskier. By the mid-1990s, security cameras and motion sensors appeared on the edges of rail yards and utility corridors. Private security firms monitored live feeds, and police could review footage to identify anyone caught on site. What once ended with a warning or a story to tell now meant citations, fines, or even arrest. In many states, getting caught inside a storm drain or on railroad property is prosecuted as criminal trespass, with penalties that can include thousands of dollars in fines and a permanent record. The change was sweeping. BMX crews who once filmed VHS tapes in the Denver ditches found their favorite spots sealed behind chain link and razor wire. Urban explorers who once mapped forgotten tunnels now risk arrest just for stepping over a fence. Liability law, insurance mandates, and new technology combined to erase what had been a central part of 1980s adventure culture. Today, the idea of wandering into an abandoned factory or storm drain is not just discouraged, it is illegal. And the consequences are real. For a generation raised on the freedom of unsupervised exploration, the transformation is stark. What was once a badge of youthful independence now brings the highest risk of arrest on this list. capping a countdown that began with the everyday adventures of the analog era. Across all 9 entries, one pattern stands out. What was once seen as normal childhood freedom or everyday risk is now tightly regulated by law and technology. Shifting attitudes, new safety standards, and digital surveillance have redrawn the line between adventure and offense. Our past is not just nostalgia, it is a window into how society redefines danger. Which shift surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below.